Well, one significant change for all of us during the pandemic has been the way we shop. As stores were forced to close and online sales surged, companies were left scrambling to shore up their supply chains and, of course, reevaluate their strategies in order to survive. So, is this shift in consumer behaviour here to stay? Julianna Tatelbaum has more with a panel of guests.
Jeff, thank you so much. And let me now introduce to you this panel who's going to discuss this all-important question, global supply chains, what comes next. Lin Wan is the CEO of Cainiao Network. Takeshi Niinami is the CEO of Suntory. And Frans Muller is the CEO of Ahold Delhaize. Thank you all for joining us today. Takeshi, let me kick off with you and ask, what were some of the most challenging moments from a supply chain perspective over the last year? Takeshi?
Yes, we faced the disruption of the supply chain, such as a lack of the number of containers all of a sudden, and lots of people could not work effectively. So the disruption affected our operation. Second thing is over-reliance to some countries for supply chain, such as food materials. So we have to make a plan to change the entire supply chain so that we can mitigate the risk by the over-reliance.
Lin, let me turn to you on that note in terms of the changes spurred by over-reliance on certain areas. Have you seen any signs of foreign companies diversifying away from China, given the heavy reliance on the country in the lead up to the pandemic?
Actually, we are seeing the demand is actually getting higher and higher. Actually, people are seeing the value of the whole end-to-end supply chain services. And so we're seeing a higher demand in terms of on the consumer side as well as on the business side. So given the shortage of the transportation capacity, but all the logistics companies and all the consumer brands are fighting together to see how we can optimize our supply chains and the logistics network in order to meet this kind of demand, the gap between the demand and the supply.
Lin, on this note, how have you coped with the sudden increase in demand for shipping over the last year, and where are the outstanding supply chain bottlenecks?
Yes, so for us, we have been looking to how can we create the end-to-end supply chain solutions for our global brands, especially in this pandemic impact, right? In this case, on one hand, we have to help to move a lot of the supplies to fight with the pandemic. On the other hand, since people are more and more relying on online shopping, especially we've seen that not just that they are buying more stuff online, actually they're buying much more different categories. For example, like groceries and heavy and bulky stuff, which was not so popular online. But right now, people are really relying on the e-commerce, and on the back of that is the logistics infrastructure to support that. So those are the two things we have to handle at the same time. For us, we think the most important thing is we put into two efforts. One effort is how can we use the internet technology and data to connect with all our partners, with all our clients, so that we can make our the supply chain more seamless, more transparent, so that we can react to the demand, react to any changes, more agile, more flexible, so that we can better utilize our capacity. On the other hand, we try to add more capabilities. We try to fully utilize the infrastructure we have built in the last couple of years. For example, we have been investing heavily on the logistic hubs. For example, we call it e-hubs. We had one in the Delhaize in Belgium. We had one in Kuala Lumpur in Southeast Asia. We have one in Hong Kong. Those e-hubs has played an essential role during this period. They have been the most stable gateways to both for in and out of different part of the world for transporting different kind of goods. So those are the two things we have been working at the same time to try to bridge the gap.
Lin, great stuff, and I want to go into more detail on the future of logistics and transportation a little bit later, but now I want to turn to Frans to get some insight into how these supply chain issues are affecting the consumer. To what extent, Frans, have you seen price inflation come through and mean higher prices for you as a buyer and higher prices for the ultimate consumer?
Yeah, thank you, Julianna. And first of all, this pandemic was the biggest shock wave in our supply chain since the last 20 years. And product availability, especially in our food categories and our fresh category, was very important, but also the safety for associates and for consumers. We are in the business of supermarkets and online, and we run 7,000 stores. So this shock was quite immense, and I'm very proud how we dealt with the rapid response. Also, in line with what also Lin said before, the end-to-end visibility in the total supply chain is key. The data reliability is key between all the partners from the farm to the kitchen. And that's why we also think that further standardization of supply chain data is very important, like the GTIN standards, for example. We are furthermore expediting and accelerating the standardization of our forecasting and replenishment tools, and artificial intelligence will play an enormous role here. And if we get more control about our supply chains and we are better in forecasting, then also the availability and the right availability, especially in the food and fresh food sections, is more and more important. And don't forget, in the total food chain, 30% of what has been produced is never arrive a consumer, because it's the whole food, the food waste topics. I think there we have a big opportunity, not only reduce cost, but also make more food, produced food, available for consumers. So back to your question on the raw materials. We have, as a buyer and as a seller of food products, we're very carefully looking at our economic models. We have should cost models, how we try to understand rising in prices or potential rise in price in raw materials or packaging or energy or labor or transportation. And those should cost models should give us the right price. It's our job to have fair prices for consumers, and retail in general, by negotiating properly, is having a good deflationary effect on raw material prices as well. And that's where we are in at the moment. So before we assume price increases, we better make sure that we understand them properly. And if we understand them, we also can translate them to consumer prices and also pass on that part which is justified.
Frans, are you having any issues finding and or retaining labor?
I think we see in the markets where we are, and especially also when you talk about repetitive work, then the availability of labor is not always easier, and we see also a labor cost in some parts of our network rising. But we are used to this. We always find ways to compensate this with productivity gains, or with further automation of repetitive work. And that we see in stores, if it's in self-checkout, we see that in DCs with the fully automated DCs, for example. So I think technology will help here, and AI will help here as well to overcome these kind of shortages of labor. Let's not forget, labor in our business not the whole year the same level, right? We have seasonality, and where in the past, with a lot of international labor as well in the markets, both in Europe and in the US, we see that also those migration flows are getting lower. So we have to find new solutions in the future of work. How do we get ourselves organized? But I think technology can be a big help here, and we are used to this in the last 10, 20 years to find productivity gains to compensate for potentially increased labor cost.
Takeshi, I want to turn back to you and get a sense of how consumer preferences are changing. There seems to be an overall trend within advanced countries away from alcohol consumption, away from sugary drinks. How are you evolving to meet the changing demands of the consumer?
Julianna, you're right. There are some significant changes in consumer demand. As you mentioned, consciousness to health is very much a significant consumer behavior. And we focused on R&D to be more health conscious manufacturer. such as putting more resources to R&D, like less sugar content beer, for example, and no alcohol beer, and toward the less alcohol. Having said that, that is a huge trend. But another flip side of coin of this trend is more premium consumption. People are inclined to the premium products because they don't drink so much alcohol nowadays, but they prefer premium brands. So two things: one, more technological investment toward the less sugar, less calorie, but taste good. So we have to resolve the trade-off by technology using AI, a lot of data analysis in R&D, and collect the information from data from chatting and chat and ID from consumers, and use those data for our R&D and new product development. And having said that, I think we have to premiumize our brands furthermore by engaging in consumers. For example, home consumption used to be the big weapon for us to raise awareness of brands. They are restaurants and bars. They are still very important.
Right.
And it's been picking up at the time of the post-COVID or because of the rollout of vaccines.
Right.
But still, home consumption is so much needed, and we can, collect the data, collect the information. But key thing is how to entertain those consumers at home by innovation.
Data seems to be a common thread listening to all of you talk about supply chains and where we go from here. Lin, I want to wrap up with you. You talked about innovations and how things will look different in the future. James Pep has written in, a viewer here, how will AI change supply chain logistics in the future, Lin?
Yes, I think especially after the pandemic, people realize how important digitized, transparent, and agile supply chain logistics it is, right? So we have seen a lot of effort and investment putting into the AI and also the Internet of Things, the IoT hardwares, so that we can try to digitize and try to bring all the data and information together, which is the first step before we go to the AI. So that's the thing. We already see a lot of people putting the IoT technology automation into to transform the current logistic and supply chain. The second step, once we gathered all the information, all the status, we are going to use the AI to be able to respond to some of the extreme cases like what we had experienced during the pandemic. Right, so with the AI, we can do the real-time monitoring, real-time routing, real-time assignment based on the most updated changes and foresee some of the bottlenecks. So those are the things is already happening right now.
Very clear. Well, thank you all for joining this panel, giving us some more insight into how global supply chains may look in the future. Lin Wan, CEO of Cainiao Network, Takeshi Niinami, CEO of Suntory, and Frans Muller, CEO of Ahold Delhaize.